And now I want to introduce to you, it's a great pleasure and honor to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Simpson. He took over the reins of the Delaware State Police on July 1st. He joined the Delaware State Police in 1967, and he's worked his way through the ranks right up to superintendent. Colonel Simpson was born in Newcastle County, and he's lived the last 11 years in Kent County. He was married, and he has 2 sons. Colonel Simpson is a graduate of Wilmington College and earned his Master's of Education degree at Temple University. Dan, it's a pleasure to have you on Focus Delaware.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you started in 1967. I was working in Wilmington at that time, too, at a gas station at 30th and Market. Times were lively then. There were the riots that were going on. Did that whole experience give you a certain perspective as a policeman just starting out?
I don't think there's any question about it. 1967 was a very special and unique time in American history and probably in world history. I had returned in November of 1966 from a tour in Vietnam. I just discharged from the service. And I was appointed soon afterwards in February of 67 to the State Police Academy. I hit the streets sometime that following fall when the civil disorder began. I think it was a time when America grew. I think we matured considerably. It was a time when people, out of frustration, began to react to issues instead of acting to resolve problems. And it was a very interesting time, a very trying time, and in many ways a very tragic time, but fortunately, as a result of those experiences, I think we have grown, and people are now dealing with issues in a way they should be dealt with, as opposed to taking their problems to the streets in the form of confrontations with the police. And it was an interesting time, and I know that speaking to you earlier, you had some experience on the streets at that time, and you have some insight as to just exactly what went on.
Well, it was interesting. I worked at a gas station and was a target of a victim of crime, actually, at that point. I ended up working in the Smyrna prison when I was a criminal justice minor at the University of Delaware, and bumped into some of the people that had bumped me off. And it was interesting. We got into a very interesting sociological discussion as to the roots of it all. And I learned an awful lot from that experience, too. But speaking of victims of crime, what is happening to the victim of a crime, the unforgotten victim? Is there more attention being given to the victim of crime these days?
I think in recent years we have started to focus our attention on the victim of a crime, as opposed to, particularly from a police point of view, we were always very much concerned in identifying the offender, the violator, and locating him, bringing him to justice, prosecuting. And as a result of that, we frequently overlook the needs of the individual. Crime is pretty much looked at today as something other than a single incident, but rather an event. Something that doesn't just involve a violator and a victim, but rather something that has a major impact on the victim, the police officer and the role that he plays, the prosecutor, and all of society. And I think that it's in looking at the total question of crime and the impact that it has on society that will eventually lead to some steps to the prevention of crime and the dealing with the causations of crime, as opposed to what I think historically have been kind of first stage steps toward dealing with it.
Specifically, what about the rape victim? Is sort of a person who was maligned, that type of victim? Is there a specific program that these days targeted towards the rape victim?
Well, in the last 10 years probably, the very active women's organizations who were probably first to really bring to our attention the importance of dealing with the rape victim, as opposed to just merely concentrating on finding the violator and prosecuting him. They were the people who probably really brought to light the total picture and really made us focus in on victims of all crimes. Rape, as we know, is a very tragic and very ugly assault, and it is quite often mistaken as merely an unlawful sexual act, and that doesn't even begin to describe the horror and the atrocity that's involved with that kind of an assault. And we know now that in dealing with that from a police investigative point of view, we have to be very sensitive to the feelings of people, and I think that generally the criminal justice system has made some changes to accommodate the victim a little more.
Let me change the topic a little bit. What about minority recruitment and recruitment of women? What do you see the role of your role in that direction?
Well, I have launched in the last 30 days a very aggressive minority recruitment program. We are not embarrassed by our efforts by any means, but we're not exactly proud of the results that we have realized at this point. We are presently, through public service announcements, I know with this particular television station and throughout the media, we have tried to reach minorities and females. We would like very much to recruit more into law enforcement. There is definitely a place for them. We don't like to hear the term used that law enforcement and police work is a non-traditional role for females. I personally don't think there's any such thing as a non-traditional role for females, and I don't like that term. It tends to discourage people from applying, and we think that and we can show historically it has been a traditional role. It just has not been a traditional role in large numbers, and we want to try to do something about correcting that.
Now, we've all heard that there's a lot of stress among police officers. I've heard there's a high divorce rate, even a drinking problem among policemen. What do you see are the big concerns about stress among policemen, and what's going to be done to try to alleviate that problem?
Well, the stresses involved in a career in law enforcement are probably a little bit different than they are in many other careers. Obviously, the police officer experiences the same stressful situations associated with home life that we all do. Budget problems and household problems and problems related to children and family problems. And then he goes to work, and when he arrives at work, he finds that he is now very much a part of those same kinds of problems shared in other households, and he finds himself involved in those, the problems of the overall community. And many times he experiences the stress of making very important decisions with very little data for making a good decision. Something that has to be done in a few seconds. It could affect someone's life, or in fact probably ultimately result in somebody living or dying. There are a lot of problems with stress, and we are addressing that issue at this point through physical fitness programs, trying to provide ways for the individual to vent some of his built-in anxieties, frustrations, and that sort of thing. And we're also, we have a psychologist that is available. We have counselors for alcoholism, and we don't have what I would consider an alcohol problem with the Delaware State Police, but if we have one person that's drinking and possibly drinking too much, I suppose that is a problem. But we have people available, and we have made them available in the last few years to offer some kind of counseling where it's needed.
Well, thank you, Daniel Simpson, for coming on Focus Delaware.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Daniel Simpson. He's the new captain of the Delaware State Police, and he's a man who's concerned about not only his role as a policeman, but in sensitizing the Delaware State Police to the important issues at hand, and I applaud him for his